let's just have a general introduction. I'm going to start with Mr. Isiah Thomas. Most of us grew up watching this guy. It, People don't understand how far sports travels, right? I was in Sierra Leone in West Africa, thousands of miles away from the United States, but this guy right here inspired many, many kids when we were growing up. NBA legend, won back-to-back championships, worked as a coach, executive, one of the 50 greatest players ever. He's been there, done that, and this just shows you when we come together and put our heads together, it's a beautiful thing. Mr. Jackson as well. Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you. I don't know how you can follow that. I mean,
well, let's just
still inspiring to this day.
Yeah, it is definitely. That's why I keep saying it's such sports transcends literally everything. So I heard you are the vice president of content operations for NBA Digital, and also you work with Turner Sports, right?
Yeah, I do have a correction. I'm a senior vice president.
Oh, senior vice president, even better.
Of content operations and diversified sports content, which is a group that we can talk about a little bit. It's our corporate initiative and recognition of empowerment and diversified storytelling in sports. So happy to head that group up.
I think we need more of that, actually. It's going to help with the conversation going forward. And obviously, Mr. Lewis, experienced writer, been doing this for 20 odd years over there at the Daily Mirror, assistant editor. I also work with CNN Sports. So I'm just privileged to be in this panel with you guys. My name is Lloyd, Randall, Sierra Leonean, working here for Star Times, also with MIPAD. Technically grew up in China. I call myself a Black Chinese now, So I want to welcome you guys. We say Ni Hao and Wan Shang Hao in Chinese. Wan Shang Hao means good evening, and Huan Ying Ni Man means welcome you guys to the Chinese Black family. So I'm happy you guys are here. So the reason why we're here, the August 31st, 2021 became officially International Day for people of African descent to get recognized. We're going to have Recognition Week. So the reason why we're here is to discuss Black issues, because I think these conversations, like we've all seen, you can be in the UK, you can be in Africa, you can be in Sudan. At the end of the day, we are on this one umbrella of Blackness. So the more we share our experiences, the better it is. What I've decided to do today, we're going to focus on, because we've chosen some specific athletes that we want to give special recognition to, talk about their life stories. I'm going to be asking questions based on that. We're going to be talking about guys who have really changed the conversation. Obviously, Colin Kapernick, Thierry Henry, Simone Biles, Masai Ujiri as an executive, Lewis Hamilton, Naomi Osaka, and a few other people. So I want to start first with Mr. Z. Mr. Isiah Thomas. I mean, we've had this conversation about racism in sports for many, many decades. There have been athletes who have stood up, they were marginalized, ostracized, called names, and pummeled by the media at large, government try to silence them. But lately, Colin Kaepernick was the guy who really reignited that conversation to the level where it went global. I mean, kids can be in a village somewhere in Mozambique, and they knew what Colin was trying to do. So can you speak on that with regards to how Colin set the conversation and how crucial that is as we try to push forward with the agenda of showing respect to Black people who have accomplished so much?
Thank you. And I would just also, before we get started, I just want to also say, to Mr. Jackson, he's also a mentor to all of us in this corporate space in terms of, how we're dealing in this corporate world and how we're, basically presenting and projecting ourselves. So I want to thank him for that. And in terms of, Kaepernick reigniting the conversation, because it's always been a conversation here in America. And, forgive the noise in the background. I apologize.
I can hear you.
But it's always been a conversation. Race has always been a conversation here in America, where we've always tried to, us as melanated people have always tried to figure out how do we rise out of these, basically apartheid boxes that we've been put in terms of governing, in terms of, being seen. And early on, you know, and I'll just give you my personal experience. You know, the writers and the narratives and the script writers were basically all white male Caucasians, where, you know, we were viewed through their perspective, through their lens. And then when it got to the editorial desk, the editors were all white male also. So the personification of us in terms of how we were perceived, how we were viewed in society, that's what we've always been fighting for in our community and also in sport. Sport gives us the platform to really have voice and voice what's going on in our communities, voice what's going on in our families, and voice what's going on as citizens, because this is the only time that the community really gets the mic to speak. So the athlete has always been held accountable to speak for the voiceless. And what Kaepernick did in terms of bringing attention to police brutality in our communities, which has been historically since the 1800s, you know, since the inception of America in the United States, he basically brought back an old argument in terms of how we were being policed in our community, how America was viewing us as Black people in the United States and as citizens, and then started the conversation about systemic racism. So, you know, he was very important in terms of us being where we are today in this conversation.
And recognize in the Colin Kaepernick situation, the Colin Kaepernick protest was never about disrespecting the flag, the Star Spangled Banner, any of that. It was in protest of police brutality, systemic racism in our country. And the narrative got flipped because he happened to take his stance publicly with, you know, the tradition of singing of the national anthem during a football game. And so the tables turned on him with this false narrative that he was protesting against something that was created by media. In all fairness to him, and he paid the price. It ultimately ended his career as a football player. And if you look about, you know, the landscape of the last, you know, 5 years of the NFL, and you cannot point to quarterbacks that deserve an opportunity over him, either in a backup or a starting quarterback situation. So, you know, it's always, you know, those that are loudest that end up paying the price. And it's a sacrifice that he chose to make. And there were others that joined, but he was the face of the movement. And, but it was never about, you know, this narrative that they created in media.
Can I just add to what you've just said, Eric, because there are two strands here in the UK that relate to Colin Kaepernick, one of which is particularly significant. Colin Kaepernick and the unwillingness to understand what was a very clear message has resonance over here, in so much as when footballers take the knee in this country, there is a deliberate, and I use that word very clearly, a deliberate attempt to conflate the fight for racial justice and equality with communism and Marxism and all sorts of things that the players, the sportsmen, are not kneeling for. It's very similar to when lots of people try to suggest, and still do, that Kaepernick tried to disrespect the American flag. It's an attempt at misdirection. Well, that's what happens here. And even though the footballers themselves, the other sportsmen, the administrators, the head coach of the English soccer national team has been very clear, both on broadcast media, in writing in the matchday program, on lots of different levels, this is why we kneel. Lots of people still refuse to release themselves from the mistaken belief that the players are kneeling for something other than racial justice. Why do they do that? Because they don't want to accept or embrace the concept of racial justice. And the parallels are so strong between the attempts to malign what Colin was trying to do and what is happening in this country. I think also going forward that the concern is that what happened for Colin could happen to sportsmen in this country, which is why in some cases there is an unwillingness from sportsmen who are not elite. Those ones who are elite, who have that financial security, yes, they're using their platforms, but others who could speak don't speak because they don't want to be marginalized in quite the same way. And that sets the movement back, I fear, because while there are far more big sportsmen and women in the US who have no compunction about using their platforms, do it with skill, do it with precision, do it with strategy. Here in the UK, we are still a long way behind you guys over there.
I'm curious to hear your take on Marcus Rashford and, the Manchester United footballer who has been at the forefront of, social activism with, child food poverty, reading programs, and who received a lot of backlash in the UK. And I'm just curious how that story resonates in London.
Yeah, Marcus Rashford is a footballer for one of the biggest teams here in the UK, biggest soccer teams, Manchester United, in the world. He's a very talented footballer. He's an England international footballer as well. And what he did was he picked up on the issue of child poverty in this country and campaigned to get the government to make a commitment to feeding children during the school holidays. And there were a number of politicians who applauded his efforts to do that. But when they were asked how they voted, it transpired that they voted against in favor of the policy not to feed children outside of the school term. And so what Marcus Rashford did was he campaigned to ensure that those kids were fed. He also has campaigned on the issue of racism as well. But essentially, that's one of the biggest things he did, because that campaign, what he did was he used his social media platform, which has millions of followers. He utilized TV, the broadcast media, the radio, lots of the biggest breakfast TV channels, the equivalent of Good Morning America here in the UK. He used to get people on side. He used print media as well. He's very, very skilled at being able to use lots of the digital platforms to be able to galvanize and gain momentum for what he was trying to do. And he successfully managed to change government policy. And Rashford is an example of the elite footballer, as I say, who is able to use his platform to take that fight, to speak truth to power. And he has had a degree of success with that. And he's almost an example of the way that I think footballers here in the UK can use their commercial power to make an impact, to make a statement. My concern, my frustration is that lots of players who can possibly don't use their power enough.
I was going to toss to you, but I was going to labor the point, and I like the way you put that, Darren, withdraw their labor. We experienced that last year, a year ago, in the NBA and the WNBA bubble, when the Milwaukee Bucks decided not to play, along with the rest of the games, that night in the WNBA as well. We experienced that in some of the majors this year with Naomi Osaka deciding not to play, with Simone Biles deciding not to compete because of her mental health, not in a framework to compete. And it could create a very dangerous situation as an athlete for her, trying to compete when she's not, at her tip top shape on the biggest platform in the world. And so, I was going to toss to you, Isiah, to speak about that. And, what, from an athlete standpoint, do you feel we can do more in that area? And also, what is the mental state of the athlete that decides to withdraw their label?
I think a new day is upon us, thankfully, where the athlete now is starting to be seen as human, and this goes along with the racialized boxes and conversation of dehumanization that has always happened to us in these spaces. The language that is described, when we talk about how the athlete performs, he or she is described in animalistic terms, and those are things that we have fought historically. Those are the things that I've fought historically in this space with the Detroit Pistons when we were champions. The first time I was called a thug, and I grew up on the west side of Chicago, but the first time I was called a thug, someone was describing my play in me, and it was a white male Caucasian who gave that description. So when we come back to the athlete of the day, he and she is demanding that they be seen as human and as human beings and being talked about in a very human way and not being talked about in a dehumanizing way. And I think that's where we are. And I think this is a beautiful day because, again, sport is leading the cause. Sport is leading that direction. And why does sport always have to take the lead position? Sport always take the lead position because this is the place where we really bring together all races, cultures, religions, likes, dislikes, and we put them in one place for 2.5 hours, and everyone cheers for the team in blue or cheers against the team in white, and then they disperse back into society and they go into their boxes. So sport is the place where you really can look at a society and say, okay, these are the things that work, these are the things that don't work. Well, what has not worked for the athlete is being dehumanized in such a way in terms of language, in terms of the business models that we work under. And, when you look at the business model and the language around the business model, you get drafted, then you become a free agent. No, I'm sorry, you become a restricted free agent. And then you become a free agent where you have to fight for your right to be free in this working space. So all these words and terms and concepts that we use around sport, around the athlete, has impact on the athlete emotionally, spiritually, socially, and also perception-wise. And the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we look, and the way we are described by the scripters and the narrative writers have been diametrically opposed to each other.
So I'm going to segue into another question that's very key for me. I'm going to pose this to you, Mr. Lewis. Let's look at the case of Thierry Henry, right? Now, this guy, great player, won everything that he could win in sports. I want to give this example because it's very imperative where when you win, people hail you, you're one of us. And when you lose, you become a pariah. Remember in 1998, when France won that World Cup, right? It was probably the most multicultural, multiracial, multinational team to ever win a major event. That showed me the schism that existed in France at that time. When that team won, remember, the conservative leader, Marine Le Pen's dad, came out and said, you know what? Those guys over there, they're not French. We don't want them here. That's not a French title. We don't care. And that for me was the point where I went from this high thinking, wow, this multicultural French team can dominate the world, and it's a great thing. But then I was, they let me know, listen, no, that team won, but those guys are not one of us. They are not really French. So these are some of the issues that we've dealt with. I remember the same guy playing in Spain. His jersey was soaked wet because the fans in Valencia in a Champions League game for Arsenal were spitting at him. His jersey he went to the referee, showed him, look at my jersey, they're spitting on me. Referee says, play on, there's nothing I can do. So I want you to address this issue where when we win with a multicultural team, oh, it's great. But then sometimes it shows the ugliness that is embedded in these big nations and these big corporations, Mr. Lewis.
It's a really good and important point that you raise, because we've had an example just this summer of exactly the scenario that you describe and that we saw during the time of Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie, in 1998. I remember there had been a slight backlash against it, where people said, well, look, if you take the black, particularly the influential players out of the French national football team at that point, you would have very few players capable of winning them a World Cup.
Yeah.
But what happened then is what is happening now. There is a wave of populist prime ministers, presidents, whatever, who are leading this anti-immigrant fervor. And so if you are other, then you're under threat.
Yeah.
And what has happened, for example, here in England, during the summer, even I, with my salt and pepper, was carried away with the
it's coming home.
well, kind of in a sporting context, but also more specifically the multiculturalism of the teams that were following England until the very end. Actually, that's not quite true. I'll just backtrack ever so slightly. Before the tournament began, we were speaking ourselves on and off camera about players taking the knee, and players were taking the knee before the tournament. And what was happening was you had lots of people booing their own footballers taking the knee in pursuit of racial justice and racial equality. But added to that, what you also had was the Home Secretary of this country defending the right of the people who booed the knee to boo. You had high-profile TV columnists and hosts basically defending the right of the people who booed to boo our own national team players. And you had the Prime Minister of this country defending the right of those players, of those fans, to conduct themselves in that way. But then what happened was the team started to win. This multicultural team began to win, and they began to progress during the tournament, and they started to surmount the hurdles that normally are insurmountable historically for this country. And suddenly they were at the final, and everyone was embracing this multicultural team. And everyone at that point with an England jersey on was an Englishman until we lost. And once we lost, the black footballers were subjected to the racist abuse that's now well documented. And it was just a really stark reminder, even to us older heads, as well as to the younger generation, that you are English when you are winning, but you are black, brown, other when the team isn't doing so well, when the team comes up short. And in a way, I would imagine all of us are experienced enough to know how these things work. But it's heartbreaking to know that another generation of black teenagers, young men, children, are having to come to terms with that reality in 2021. It's very, very sad, but it also strengthens my resolve, certainly, to use whatever platform I have to be honest and open about the inequities and the true picture of what we're facing, because however optimistic we might be about the future, there are always areas where there is more work to do.
I certainly agree. I want to bring Mr. Thomas and Mr. Jackson back in this conversation, because they always find these things to, look down on us. For example, Simone Biles, one of the most dominant, successful gymnasts in the world. If you told me when I was a kid watching sports back in Freetown, Sierra Leone, that the best female gymnast was going to be a Black woman, I would have laughed, because there was no representation. I didn't see a Black gymnast out there. So you tell me this girl is not just Black, but then she comes into the sport, dominates, wins all these medals, the most decorated, but then she goes to an event when she was only 16, she wins, and then this girl just says, oh, maybe they should just paint all us Black, implying that she won because of some bias. You see these things, and when Serena Williams was dominating, oh, she's too strong, trying to make her feel as if she's not feminine. Then we have the issue where Black girls from Namibia doing well in athletics. Next thing you know, they have too high a testosterone. Listen, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Jackson, we have been facing these things for so long. The question is, what do we do? Because I'm tired of sitting here and complaining about FIFA, UEFA, and NBA. I mean, what do we do? Simone Biles is winning, but maybe because she's Black. Serena Williams is winning. Oh, maybe she's too strong. These things are so infuriating and really gets on my nerve, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Jackson.
You want me to go first, EJ?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So what I see happening on the national stage when we are at the Olympics, everyone is there under their national or nationality umbrella. And Darren, you hit on it when you said when you're winning, you're Englishman, and then when you lose, you back to the apartheid boxes that we've all been put in terms of color, that they call race, or that has been termed race. And this is no different than, Jesse Owens when he won at the Olympics. When those athletes came back to America, they were put back in those color boxes. But when you're on the national stage at the Olympics, you are under the American umbrella, or you're under whatever country that you are signifying at that time. Where we have to get to a point in terms of unification is, do we unify across the globe under our nationalities, and do we fight for our citizenship and status? But as long as we are separated in these colored apartheid boxes, then it allows systemic racism to come in. It allows different biases to come in terms of stereotypes, what you're discussing and talking about in terms of dehumanization and how we're being pictured and perceived. These are the narratives that are attached to these color boxes that we call stereotypes. So how do we get away from these assigned, scripted, racialized boxes that incorporate the stereotypes that goes along with them, that makes the national audience see us in a particular way? And again, Darren, I'm gonna keep driving home the point that you made so eloquently, in terms of being Englishman when you're winning, but then being Black when you're losing. And that's where we're all trying to fight for to get to globally, is how do we unify under our own nationalities, under our own Aboriginal statuses in our own countries, and rid ourselves of these polarized, systemic, racialized, apartheid color boxes that we all find ourselves in.
Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, these two gentlemen, Darren and Isiah, spoke it so eloquently and comprehensively that I don't have much to add. But as both of them were speaking, I was thinking to myself, what happens when the Olympics are over and you don't have that unification under one flag? What happens when the championship is over? All of the champagne has been spilled and you go back to your sector of society. And even in the corporate environment, what happens when, this congregation of diverse backgrounds, religion, race, color, creed, sexual orientation, all come together in these environments for one sort of unified cause? What happens when they leave? And we touched on it a little bit. You go back to your neighborhood or, your corner of society, and then what happens? Where's the solidarity? Where's the treatment? Where's the unification? Where is the mental acceptance, cultural acceptance that happens in those environments once you leave? And so, that's sort of where I was hanging out as you guys were speaking.
And another point, you mentioned the corporate world and being executives. It's good we have Mr. Isiah Thomas here, because you look at the statistics, right? In the NFL, in the NBA, 75% of players are Black. You go to the big leagues in Europe, a plethora of Black players. Then you look at the coaches in Europe, across 14 major leagues in Europe, a lot of Black players. I stand corrected. Only 3.9% are Black coaches. You go to the NBA and the NFL, same thing. Black players dominated. You go to the front offices. That's why we have Masai Ujiri as one of the guys we're recognizing, because he's at that position where he's in the executive spot. Now, you guys, especially Mr. Thomas, has been in that position before. What are the issues, just the checks and balances that is put in place deliberately or otherwise to make sure that Black folks, when they retire from the sport, winning all these accolades, they still cannot get that job at the front office making big decisions?
The athlete.
Before you say anything, let me just tell you who Isiah Thomas is. Isiah Thomas was Masai Ujiri in Toronto.
Yeah, I remember that.
I
remember that, yeah.
So he is speaking from a place of very institutional knowledge in this area. So carry on, Mr.
Oh.
Well, thank you. And I would say that the athlete on the playing field, when you cite those statistics, he or she, because of the color of their skin, is not given what we call institutional knowledge of their profession or on-the-job training. So that on-the-job training that we get from experience, and they say that the purest and the truest form of education is participation and observation. Well, we as athletes, from a participatory standpoint on the field, that is not viewed as educational. Those who observe the sport are given more credit than those who participate in the sport from an educational standpoint and a hiring standpoint. So the athlete who participates and then moves on to become an observer of his or her sport really has more institutional, ingrained, immersed knowledge than the observer. However, the observer has the power when we talk about, the white male or the white perceived dominance in the sport in terms of hiring, in terms of firing, in terms of putting together systems that work. So the athlete, what needs to change is that from a perception standpoint, is we need to be given credit for our participation and understand that those 30 to 40 years of education participation on the field equates to education.
Right. That's a very good point. I want to segue a little bit into, just very briefly, because I was tracking Black excellence at the Tokyo Olympics. It was a topic I was going to bring up very briefly, but we have such a limited time, so I'll just get to it very quickly. Now, Black athletes were very successful in Tokyo. One of the ladies we're talking about is Naomi Osaka. She being the flag bearer for Japan, the pressure on her shoulders was immense. Here's this Black girl. Is she Black? Is she Japanese? Is she American? She's under all these umbrellas. And then when she succeeds, people are deliberately wanting her to fail. They want her to fail because she has a voice. So I just want to look at that in microcosm, Mr. Lewis. The issue when you have somebody battling, where do they fit in? Are they Japanese? Are they American? Or are they from somewhere else? These issues sometimes can mentally wear down athletes, and sometimes we don't talk enough about it, especially when it comes to Black athletes and how they excel at the global stage.
Well, I spoke earlier about the mental health aspect of some of the things that our young sports stars across the board are going through, and the need to protect themselves if the sport won't protect them. Now, we know with Naomi Osaka, there was an issue before she decided, I think it was at the French Open, where she decided, look, I'm not in the right place. And she decided that she would look after herself. And the response from Roland Garros was to punish her. And that's what we are used to over the years, to be punished when we try to prioritize our own well-being. So I was really pleased with her determination to continue to look after herself.
Just with regards to the Olympics, a few things I want to mention. We had some very amazing stories. Allyson Felix becoming the most decorated Olympian. I mean, she's been there, done that, gone through every kind of adversity, and she's a winner. And in some different cases, we saw, for example, a mother and a son becoming gold medalists in the case of JaVale McGee and his mom. So there's so many beautiful stories. We also saw Black athletes in areas which are not predominantly Black sports. We had a fencer winning the medal. We even have a Ukrainian lawmaker. What is a brother doing in Ukraine? I have no idea. But he's in Ukraine, he's a lawmaker, and he's a gold medalist. So these are the success stories we had at the Olympic. So just in summary, Mr. Thomas and Mr. Jackson speak on that, how despite all the things that put in our way as obstacles, we still find ways to succeed. Allyson Felix and all those people are example of the resilience of Black athletes and us as people in general.
I would say it's inspiring to any time that obstacles are put in front of us as a classified race of people. We always find ways individually and sometimes collectively to overcome those obstacles. What I would encourage us as a panel to do is to continue to speak out, but also encourage unification. So we just don't have these one-offs. We have unified voices, and we have unified people collectively coming together. And I think that is more powerful as a story than just one person overcoming the odds, but a classified race of people rising to the level where we're all fighting for equality and we all truly become equal in this society or the societies that we're living in. That's the fight that I think we all should be fighting for in terms of global unification around our melanated skin.
Mr. Jackson, just before you answer, just another thing I want to add as well with the Olympics. We saw Black people from all countries. We had an Italian Black guy, Jacobs, winning 100 meters. We have Black Qataris, we have Black Spanish folks, we have Black Germans. So, dude, we're everywhere and we're not going anywhere. People have to get used to us. So just running up with the performances we had at the Olympics and just your take on everything I just mentioned.
Yeah, I would take what Mr. Thomas said a step further in that this solidarity that you're talking about, although we all are competitors in our own right, this solidarity is necessary, but it goes also with support of fellow athletes. This tear down mentality that we have in competition that expands across not just athletics, but in corporate environments, in our rap community, this tear down mentality that has been created by the power structure to pull us apart has to stop. And so when we talk about solidarity and unification, that also means support and love for your fellow brother and sister. And that's where I think, when we have watershed events like George Floyd, we come together probably at our greatest, moments. And we have to do that every day, not just in those watershed moments in those times. Right. And so, when I have conversations with my big brother Isiah, and we talk about things like this, it's got to be more than just us. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our fellow man to have these conversations with them as well, and not just at levels where we've somewhat achieved in society, but at lower levels, lifting up, young men and women and creating that next generation of boys.
Guys, it's been a blessing. It's been an honor. And to all of us, it's Recognition Week, Black Excellence, African People of Descent. We are going to get to a place where no one can pull us down. Before we go, just a quick mention, Lewis Hamilton as well. We didn't speak on him too much. Great guy. He's in the sport where he's the only Black race car driver, excelled. Not only the only Black guy there, but he's the best guy. And he's been through so much already. He's been maligned since he was 8 years old. And he speaks up. Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lewis, Mr. Thomas, you've all spoken about this need to speak up. And Lewis Hamilton is not going to be silenced. He's a Sir, by the way. So the folks who hate him even more. So on that note, I want to thank you all. It's been what a special day.
This is Camille. This is Camille. I want to have a quick final word with everyone. This is Camille. I am the CEO of this group, the most influential people of African descent. And it's just been a joy listening to you, Lloyd. Fantastic work. Eric Jackson, Mr. Isiah, Darren, Lewis, everyone. I am a major fan. I just want to chime in before we go, right? So if you're not aware, this is the International Decade for People of African Descent by the United Nations. I'm here in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly with the world leaders, and we are pushing, the world to pay more attention to the issues that are affecting people of African descent from all over the world. One final thought and question I just want to pose to each of you, and I'd love to get final thoughts in this. When you look at police brutality and what's happening to us, every time we are killed, right? The narrative is on us, not on the person who killed us. So the camera is always on us as a people, not on the perpetrators of this. So in sports, I want to flip that and ask you, from your knowledge of how it works, when can we start putting highlights on the perpetrators on the other side of the cameras, not our players who are being abused, but on the people, the powers to be who are responsible to take care and protect them? When can we begin to shine light on them, to start saying that, this is who is not doing their job? So I just want to use that as a segue to just ask each of you to just share a final thought in what it looks like, what the promised land actually looks like, and how do we begin to put pressure in the right places to get the desired outcome?
I'll start, because here in England, I've been speaking on this issue around racism for a long time, and it gets to different stages. First, the issue of racism, then the issue of representation, because the reason why racism isn't dealt with is because we don't have that representation in administration and senior administration. If you can't recognize it, how can you deal with it? But also in terms of ensuring that when the debate around protest and how to protest and whether people should or shouldn't take a knee, you can recognize that some of it is misdirection. It's a distraction. And it's important to be able to just gently turn people's head in the direction they should be looking, which is at the people with the power, as I said earlier, to change the things that they can, because they are happy when everyone is arguing between themselves at a lower level about whether people should and shouldn't take the knee. That absolves them of any responsibility, when the spotlight should be very firmly trained on them. And we're back really ending where we started, because the reason that people in America tried to suggest that Kaepernick was being disrespectful to the flag is because they didn't want to address the issue of social justice, racial justice, representation. And that's exactly what they're doing over here. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree. It's the people with the power that should be under scrutiny. They're in my sights on World Sport. Don't worry about that.
All right, can we get that link, please, so we can amplify that message as well. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Go ahead, Mr. Jackson.
No, I will just say that that area of accountability, the athlete is now more than ever holding journalists, media accountable for their words, for their action. Corporations are holding them more accountable because the media representative is representing a corporation in most cases. And so you've seen more firings, more suspensions over the last, 5 or 6 years. And it's because the athlete's voice, I think, has dominated in terms of accountability. And when you hold the power to refuse or withdraw your labor, as Mr. Lewis eloquently put it, you get to hold people accountable. And so I think we're seeing that more prevalent today than ever before. And we need to continue to do that.
I would dovetail and kind of, tie this up if I can and use the word hegemony when we talk about the power in sport in terms of the owners of these teams being having close relationships with the networks, with the script writers. The hegemony of that creates perception, and with that perception, it also has influence across society. And what the athlete is doing right now is using, and what we're trying to do is use our collective hegemony to hold the power or the ruling classes accountable for their actions, for their words, for their deeds, and for the business model that we all have to work under when we talk about sport.
Thank you. And Lloyd, what's your final word?
My final word is just everything I've learned from these gentlemen here today is just, I think the key thing I took away is that we just have to continue. You've seen me before. I have a show over here in China. And other things, sometimes when you're in a country like this, where there's only a few Black people, your voice carries even more weight. So sometimes the expectation on your shoulders is even more immense. So I was speaking out when the English players were abused in Hungary. I was livid because we can't have it happen in 2021 where Black players are still getting monkey chants. And I'm so fed up with this whole thing. You saw my show last time out when I was saying, I want to see a more concrete punishment. I want to see a team banned for a decade or 20 years, because these very silly suspensions, a few $100,000 here and there, I haven't seen any, it doesn't make any difference. It still keeps happening. And one more thing these guys mentioned, like it's really vital and key. We cannot be hypocritical. For example, English players go to Hungary and get abused. The English press cannot be in uproar when even in England or in America, these things to happen there. Charities begins at home. You cannot be critical of the Hungarians who are not used to us. The English and the Americans, they know us 400 plus years. They know us, we know them. It starts with them. So unless we have a change where the prime minister sets an example, The United States president sets an example. Unless these things happen, we cannot be asking other people to take, ownership of this problem. So again, it's a broad topic. We keep talking about it, but we have to keep speaking up. And unless there's change from countries like the United States and the UK and Holland, these countries with a large population of Black people, unless that happens, we're going to be here for another 50 years discussing the same thing. So I want to thank these guys. I learned so much and I'm very humbled. And for me, it's been a special day that I will never forget in my life ever. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you from all of us at MIPAD. God bless you. And
Xie, as we
let's
say in
stay
Chinese. Chinese, xie, thank you. Wan Shanghao, my friends.
all right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Right on.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Right on, pal. Take care.
All right, everyone. Thank you so
Take
much.
care, guys.
All right.
Bye.
And congratulations, Eric Jackson.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's, I guess it's out already. He's one of the Werner Media recognees for this year. I reckon.
Oh,
So
yes.
I hope,
It's getting recognized.
we look
well
forward
deserved,
to,
Mr. Jackson.
Well, that was a spoiler alert because I didn't even know
you
that
didn't know
myself.
that? Okay.
Well, now you
I thought your
do.
leader-
Now you do.
I thought your leaders informed you all. All right.
No, I
worries. We'll
did
see
not
you at
know
the
that. But
ceremony.
thank you. Thank you.
All right,
I am
congratulations.
honored. Thank you.
Stay blessed, Mr.
Absolutely.
Jackson. You're a good man. God bless you, man.
You as well. God bless you all.
Take care.